So I really don't want to run out of propane in the middle of a night, especially if we're in a real deep freeze. So how do I know how much propane I have? If you're stuck in cold weather, one of the last things you want to do is to run out of propane. Unfortunately for us, we're stuck in cold weather. So I want to show you how to calculate how much propane you have in your tank. Now the reason for this is our furnace runs on propane. Our furnace is what we use to keep the inside of the RV warm, and also, just as important, the basement underneath where the pipes are. We want to keep that warm as well. So I really don't want to run out of propane in the middle of a night, especially if we're in a real deep freeze. So how do I know how much propane I have? There are a few ways to tell. They do have gauges. We happen to have a gas stop. It does have a gauge on it. It's mainly a safety feature. The gauge honestly isn't the best. It'll give you a ballpark figure on how much propane you have, but it's not going to give you an accurate reading. Another way sometimes this will work, you can actually pour warm water over the side of your propane cylinder, and what will happen is at the level of the propane and below, condensation will build up, or it will feel cold. So you can actually run your hand down the side of the tank. When it starts to feel cold, that's the level of propane. And you may have noticed this already if you grill a lot. Next time you grill a steak, watch your propane tank. Lots of times the outside will build up condensation, and that's the level of propane. But what I want to show you a way to tell pretty dang close, almost exactly how much propane you have left in your tank. And there's a couple reasons for this. Again, make sure you get through the night. But something else I want to do is I want to take these same measurements, maybe 2 or 3 nights in a row, to get an average of how much propane I use each night. That way I know if I'm running my furnace, if I use X amount of propane each night, my container holds X amount of propane. Now I can figure out how long this canister should last before I have to fill it up again. So we're going to take a few measurements outside, then we're going to go inside where it's nice and warm, and I'll show you to figure out how much propane you have in your tank. We just came in from outside because honestly it's a lot warmer in here, and I do need to use the calculator on the computer just to show you a couple things on how to calculate how much propane you have. But first, let's talk a little bit about what we did outside. We have 2 30-pound propane tanks. One of them is full, completely full, and the other one is partially full. And we really want to know how much propane is left in that partially full propane tank. We took both tanks out of the RV and we actually just put them on a regular scale. The only reason why we took the full tank out of the RV is because I really wanted to show you the calculations with the full tank, show you how much it weighs full, use the calculations on that just to kind of prove what we're talking about, and then we'll use those same calculations on the partially filled propane tank. Now you don't have to take out a full tank, I just want really just to show you for demonstration purposes. So that's really all we did outside. We just basically weighed the 2 tanks. Now there's a couple things also to be aware of, I guess kind of set a baseline. We need to know some weights and things like that to get started. So a 30-pound propane tank, this is pretty typical for a lot of RVs, weighs approximately 25 to 28 pounds empty. Okay, it just depends on the manufacturer, maybe what type of steel they're using, how thick the steel, or things like that. So approximately 25 to 28 pounds for an empty tank. A full 30-pound propane tank weighs approximately 55 to 57 pounds. Again, it just depends on the manufacturer. Also, a 30-pound propane tank will contain or can hold approximately 7 to 7.5 gallons of propane. Propane is measured in gallons. And we also need to know that propane weighs approximately 4.2 pounds per gallon. So using these weights and measurements, this is how we can determine how much propane we have in a tank. Now what we're going to do first is we'll take our full propane tank. We'll use that and run some calculations just to kind of prove the process, and then we'll do the same steps for the partially filled propane tank. Now, if you remember, a full propane tank weighs approximately 55 to 57 pounds. We're going to use 57 pounds for our example. So we'll punch in 57 pounds in our calculator. The other thing to remember is an empty 30-pound propane tank weighs approximately 25 to 28 pounds. We're going to use 27 pounds for our example here. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract the weight of an empty tank from a total weight. This gives us 30 pounds of propane that's in our full tank. So now we know how many pounds of propane our tank holds, but we really need to get to how many gallons. Now the reason for that is most times when you go to refill a tank, they're going to charge you by the gallon. So it's kind of nice to know how many gallons it has. So we do know that our tank currently has 30 pounds of propane in it. The next thing we need to do is divide by the weight of the propane. If you remember, propane weighs approximately 4.2 pounds per gallon. So we'll divide by that. And you can see our full tank has approximately 7.15 gallons of propane in it, which is right in between what we thought we said it would be, between 7 and 7.5 gallons. So those calculations work. They're correct. We just kind of proved some of the weights and things like that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take those same calculations and we're going to run them on our partially filled propane tank. If you remember, outside when we weighed our partially filled propane tank, it weighed 46 pounds. So we're going to have to start out with the 46 pounds. And before we start the calculations on our partially filled tank, if you find stuff like this helpful or even entertaining, please subscribe to our channel and make sure you hit the like button and the notification button as well, so you can get notified when our next video comes out. It really helps YouTube know that you enjoy our videos. Thanks. So now let's get on to our partially filled propane tank. Remember, it weighs 46 pounds. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 46 pounds, subtract the weight of an empty cylinder to figure out how much propane we have in there. Once we subtracted the weight of an empty cylinder, you can see we have 19 pounds of propane in our partially filled tank. Now what we want to do is get that to find out how many gallons of propane that is. Again, all we have to do is divide by the weight of 4.2, which is the weight of a gallon of propane, to figure out how many gallons we have. So we will take the 19, we're going to divide by 4.2, and you can see we have roughly 4.5 gallons of propane in our tank. So this is nice to know. We know we're over half full, but what I really like about this is I can run these same calculations 3 or 4 nights in a row and get an average of what I use every night, and that just gives me a baseline. They're going to be different every night, but it will give me a baseline, so I know roughly when I will run out of propane. It may last me a week, it may last a month, but it gives me a rough idea. Now there is a slightly easier way to do the same type of calculations. Now that you understand the weights of a full propane cylinder and how everything works, let me show you just a real quick way to come up with the same answer. So we know that a full propane tank weighs 57 pounds and our partially filled propane tank weighs 46 pounds. So we're going to take 57 pounds, we are going to subtract the 46 pounds. That means we've used up 11 pounds of propane. So now all we have to do is divide that by 4.2 to see exactly how many gallons of propane we've used. So 11 divided by 4.2. Now that means we've used 2.6 gallons of propane. If you wanted to, remember a cylinder holds 7, so you could roughly 7 to 7.5. So we have about 4.5 to 5 gallons of propane left in the tank. So that kind of gives you couple different ways of doing it. This is just a little bit of a shortcut, but I really wanted you to understand basically all the calculations. It's very, very simple as long as you know the measurements. And you can do this for other size tanks as well. Most grills have like a 20-gallon propane tank. It's definitely gonna, you have to figure out the weights for that and how much, I guess for your tank, your specific tank, you would have to look up the empty weight, full weights, and how much propane they hold. So it can be done with any propane tank. Hopefully you find something like this helpful. I know it helped me out. We really didn't want to run out of propane last night. It was pretty cold, so we did run these calculations just to make sure we had enough propane for the night. Hopefully this helps you out and you learned something. Remember, always live life to the fullest.